Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Vilnius. Welcome to Lithuanian National Museum of Art. It's very difficult to explain our museum as it is 11 institutions. My wife, I think she learned about the institution only in 2 months. It took me a hard time to explain. So what you see here is Vilnius Picture Gallery. It's 1/11 of our institution. It's the very center of Vilnius Old Town, and we are very proud to have the centenary of YIVO exhibition precisely in this place, because it doesn't specialize in Jewish history and in Jewish art, but we take that Jewish history as a part of Vilnius history. So having YIVO centenary exhibition in Vilnius Picture Gallery means that Jewish past and Jewish culture is a part of Lithuania's history, and it's very important for Lithuanian society to understand. So it's been great honor and privilege to have this impulse, this first idea from my old friend, Mr. Jonathano Brento, who is here with us tonight. Who said, Arūnas, why don't we organize this exhibition at your museum? And I thought it's a brilliant idea. I immediately thought it's going to be wonderful. And I have a very capable team of curators and art experts, and we spoke about it. And now you will see this exhibition in a while after a wonderful lecture by Mr. Jonathano Brento that he is going to deliver on the YIVO institution. I believe many of you come from YIVO or you are affiliated with YIVO. Yes, so please feel at home. You are at home here, because we are, all of us, we are celebrating the centenary of the institution that was founded in Vilnius. And for the obvious reasons, for the historical circumstances that were present in Lithuania, in Poland at that time, and in Europe as general, YIVO had to leave overseas. And now we have a perfect communication, we have cooperation. And I want to invite one of the curators of the exhibition and director of this gallery. I'm a director general of the whole museum, and branches have directors. So my wonderful colleague, Dr. Aiste Bimberita, is a director of this gallery and one of the curators of the exhibition. She and her colleague had an exciting trip to New York last year. Had a very warm welcome from YIVO colleagues, worked in the archives for 2 weeks. And the result that you are going to see upstairs is mostly thanks to them. And Professor Jurgita Verbickienė, who will be your guide in the exhibition, who is a professor at Vilnius University, also in the neighborhood. So, dear colleague Aiste, please welcome our wonderful guests. And share a couple of thoughts about the exhibition project and your trip to YIVO in New York, please.
Thank you, Director General. It's an immense pleasure to see all these wonderful guests here. As our director mentioned it, coming back home to Vilnius, it means really a lot to us. And I would start from the very beginning. I clearly remember the day when the director told me about this idea of organizing the exhibition dedicated to YIVO here. And I said, let's do it, but let's do it in a way of celebrating the Litvaks culture, because there are many different ways of talking about Jewish culture. And my idea was to celebrate, to show the life which was ages ago. And I think that we really succeeded by doing that. And so you will see many beautifully made objects from 16th to early 20th centuries. And this is the main goal of the Vilnius Picture Gallery, because usually we are dedicated to the art from 16th to 19th centuries. And usually we talk about Lithuanian Polish culture. So it was a great challenge, but really, how to say, really interesting and really pleasant challenge to look through our lens and through YIVO lens. To cherish the Jewish culture, but also to do it in the frames of Vilnius Picture Gallery topics and chronological frames. And I really, really want to thank you for Jonathan and his colleagues who really welcomed us dearly in New York. It was a really, how to say, really beautiful trip, and we found many interesting objects which we haven't seen before. And none of my team were experts of Jewish culture at all. So you can imagine what kind of challenge we had. But like I mentioned before, it was a huge, huge pleasure, and many new things were found. And still we have so many surprises, because there are many specialists who comes to visit the exhibition and gives us really new insights and new ideas, new facts. So this is an exhibition which still works and will work in the future. And what else? I don't know. I'm so excited that I even don't know what to add. The catalog, yes, of course we will have a catalog. I hope that we will have it in the very end of the summer or the very beginning of September. And our dear colleague, Professor Jurgita Verbickienė, is the one who's preparing it. And without her, I think we wouldn't have made this beautiful exhibition. So a huge thanks to Professor. Yeah, and I'm really, really happy that she will be the one who will give you a very special, exceptional tour today, because I don't know anyone else who can talk so clearly, beautifully, and so much about this topic. So thank you once again in advance. Yeah, and I hope that you will have a really great time here. Thank you, Jonathan, for coming here again. It's a huge pleasure to see you here, and I hope that you will have a very nice evening. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, Arunas. Thank you, Aista. Thank you, Jurgita. Thank you to the gallery, to the National Gallery, to the Picture Gallery. It's almost overwhelming to have this event for the first time since YIVO was driven out of Vilnius, for us to be able to exhibit our materials here in the center of Vilnius at a state museum. It's a momentous event for us at the YIVO Institute, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Our colleagues thank you. But if they were here to see it, they would thank you even more for what I briefly saw on my brief visit already was an exhibition of extremely high intelligence and taste. And you say you didn't have much knowledge of the Jewish past, but it expresses a deep appreciation of that past that comes from empathy. It comes from a sense of understanding what this past means, whether you know the particulars of it or not. And I see, in going through the exhibition, that it clearly has meaning for you. And that is the dearest, most precious thing that I think any one of us coming from the YIVO Institute on this tour can take away. That this Jewish history has meaning for you. It is not just an ornament on a Christmas tree. It is something that is deep, and one feels in this exhibit that there is precisely what you spoke about, a sharing of a history. Not in every particular by any means, but in some deep aquifer of thinking and feeling and being in one place. Sam Kassow, who is with us, I don't know if he is here. Hi, Sam. In a lecture at one point spoke about the fact that when Max Weinreich was asked, why Vilna, of all places, Weinreich's response was that Vilna had a genius of place. It was the genius of the place. What does that mean? Well, of course, YIVO was founded here partly because of the great intellectual role that Vilna has played. And those of you on the YIVO trip, you will benefit from everything that Sam has to say about this, and others, you may read his books and read his articles. But the great tradition of learning was here. But that wasn't what explains it. Genius of place, actually, is a Roman term from Roman religion. And it designated a place in which there was a protective spirit. It often was depicted in religious iconography as a figure holding attributes such as a cornucopia or a snake. In other words, that gave protection, that gave a sense of being safe. And that is what I think was also present, not just the knowledge and the great traditions of learning, but a feeling of safety, a feeling of being at home. This was the home. Vilna was a protective spirit. It was an incubator not only of great learning, but of Jewish national culture and spiritual renewal. But there is a terrible paradox in this as well. Because just as it was a genius loci of the dueling memory of the horror, destruction, and chaos of 1941 to 1944, it was also the beloved place that Jews think back to always. And I can tell you, I have been at the YIVO Institute for 16 years. Not a day goes by that we don't talk about Vilna. Not a day goes by. The third floor, our administrative building, is called the Vilna floor. The 7-year project that we had to digitize our pre-war archives is called the Vilna Collections Project. There are some other words attached to it, but that's what it is in essence, the Vilna Collections. We have 24 million documents at the YIVO Institute. The Vilna collections represent maybe at most 2 million of those, less than 10% of those documents. But I was told a long time ago that gorillas have 97% of the DNA of human beings. So it was just that last 3%. And the Vilna collections are our 3%. Though small, it is precisely that 10%, less than 10%, that gives us our character, that gives us a sense of our place in the world in New York. And now, thanks to this beautiful exhibit here in Vilnius as well. And I should say that it is not the only, as many of you know, it is not the only celebration of YIVO's 100th year. YIVO is on a postage stamp. Fantastic. The founders of YIVO would never have imagined that, I'm quite sure, to be on a postage stamp. There is a conference at the National Library. There will be a conference at Vilnius University. There are many other things that are going on in this city as well. So this is kind of a homecoming for us, and that's what I want to talk about. Because the destruction that befell the Jewish community in this place of warmth and protection did not just come from without. It wasn't a hurricane. It came from within that community and tore it apart. Neighbors turning against neighbors. Families in desperation, fleeing to an unknown future. And it represented for all Jews of Litvak descent a terrible paradox. In fact, an insoluble contradiction, and I would say it is a contradiction that exists to this day. And as much as Vilna is the protective spirit, it was also, in a certain sense, the exterminating angel. And I use that term because that is the title of a very famous film by Buñuel, The Exterminating Angel, in which the people cannot leave the house. They are in the house, but they cannot leave. They try to leave, they can't leave. And there are many critics who think that Buñuel that this is a metaphor for Spanish politics or French politics, but I think it's in a way a metaphor also for the problem of the Jewish people of Eastern Europe as well. They could not leave their home. And it became an exterminating angel, a protective presence, and a destructive one at the same time. Today, as I said, our administrative floor is devoted to Vilna, but we also have an annual celebration, commemoration. Every year, around the time of September 23rd, we have a very solemn ceremony that we call Nusach Vilna. And it is to commemorate the liquidation of the ghetto. We thought that as the survivors died out, that Nusach Vilna commemoration would die out. And when I first got to YIVO, there were maybe 200 people who came, and the next year 100 people came, and it looked as though that was exactly what was going to happen. But 2 or 3 years later, all of a sudden we see parents are bringing children, adult children are bringing their children. And then what we found was that people who weren't even Litvaks were coming to this to find out about this. And so YIVO Vilna is embedded in our hearts and our imaginations. And as I said, that 3% is what we feel gives us our distinction and our character, but it's more than that. It took us 7 years and millions of dollars that were raised by the seat of our pants to finish the Vilna Collection's digitization program. We had no idea what impact that would have in the world, but we knew it was important to do it. The year after we finished the project, we put these materials online, and to our astonishment, 325,000 people around the world were using these materials. But in year 2, over 700,000 people used these materials around the world, from Mexico, from St. Petersburg, from China, from Turkmenistan, if that still exists, from Uganda, Cuba, Idaho, places you wouldn't think there were Jews. And all of a sudden, people are coming alive. And so this work that we're doing in Vilnius is not just bringing YIVO back in this fashion, but we are in some way reconnecting with that genius of the place. And people feel it around the world. And it is so gratifying to know that this work really has meaning. For the hell of it, I Googled Vilna recently, and I found something very interesting. I was expecting to find an article about the city. Instead, I found an article about Lithuanian wool. And it took me a little while to understand what this was, that the word in Lithuanian for wool is Vilna. And I was explaining this to a Lithuanian friend of mine, and she said, Yes, it's a warm, protective wool. It's something you use to keep you warm. It's very interesting. But then I remembered that after the war, Szmerke Kaczyński, one of those of the paper brigade who helped to save all of the materials for YIVO and hide them in the Vilna ghetto, he wrote a letter to Peretz Markish, the Soviet poet, who had survived, and they invited him to come and read his poetry in Vilna. But Kaczyński warned him. He said, "Do not come here and make people cry about our suffering. Do not come here and talk about sheep to the slaughter." And that's where this word Vilna struck me most. Sheep to the slaughter. Come here and talk about the partisans. Come here and read a poem about Jewish resistance. Come here and talk about the ghetto fighters. But do not come here and read a poem about Jewish suffering. We've had more than enough of that. And so this idea of sheep that is embedded in the very name of Vilna, if you think about it in the way I've described, is very important, and it's in our imaginations worldwide. But that protective wall, if we can go back to that for a second, what was it? What was it that made people feel that this was so much of a home? And in casting about for how to talk about this in relation to this beautiful exhibition here, I remembered the words that Yitzhak Rudashevsky wrote in his ghetto diary, and I want to read them to you because they help explain both what YIVO does, but also the reason that YIVO does what it does. Little Yitzhak was about 13 years old when he wrote this diary. He was obviously a very precocious, brilliant little boy. Not a little boy. He had quite a highly developed literary sensibility. And he begins the diary itself by saying, "I think how helpless we are, separated from one another, exposed to the mercy of the Nazis. Our day is without a future. I stand at the window and feel a seething sensation in me. My eyes are filled with tears. Our whole helplessness, our whole wretchedness lies out there in the streets. There is no one to defend us, and we ourselves are so helpless, so helpless. Life becomes harder and harder. I feel ashamed to appear with other Jews in the street, not because I am a Jew, but because I am ashamed of what has been done to us. I was ashamed of our helplessness, Ponar, where those of us in the YIVO group will be going on this trip. That word is written in blood. Ponar, the huge grave, the green area up the Pachulanka Road, a slaughterhouse for thousands of Jews. The Ponar region is saturated with Jewish blood. Ponar is the same thing as a nightmare that has accompanied the gray thread of our ghetto days. So this is the exterminating angel that is part of that identity. But on May 5th, the 5th of October, 1942, he writes this in his diary. "I made it there at last," that is to the literary club. "Today we are going to school. This was an altogether different day. Courses, subjects, both 6 grades have been combined. In school, the mood is happy. Finally, the club has opened as well. My life is settling in quite differently. Far less time is being wasted. I have read 3 by Gorky. The book made a strong impression on me. Naturally, the good news that Soviets have crossed the Don. People get excited and argue, and we are told the Germans have been unable to take Stalingrad. The classes went by fast. And listen to the classes that he is taking in the Vilna ghetto in 6th grade: Latin, mathematics, history, and Yiddish. Then back home, had a bite to eat and off to the club. Here we enjoy ourselves a bit. Today there was an inspection led by Yashunsky, head of the education department. We also watched the club's Maidim puppets perform 2 presentations after presentation in Yiddish and history to worry about. And it's all happening at the same time. Every evening as usual. Song after song echoed. We were so happy, so happy. It is already 12 o'clock at night. We are as if intoxicated by the joy of youth. No one wants to go home. Songs are bawled out that simply do not want to stop. Late at night we disperse. Today we have proved that we are young, behind walls, but nevertheless young, young forever. Today we have shown that even in the 3 little streets of the ghetto, we can maintain our youthful fervor. We have shown that it will not be a broken youth that will emerge from the ghetto. From the ghetto will emerge a strong, hardened, and spirited youth. A desire to study has become a kind of defiance of today. And here, this is so interesting, that he understands that holding on to your culture is a form of resistance. And it's only been within the last decade or so that scholars have formed the notion of cultural resistance. But here, little Yitzhak, not a scholar, understands it in his blood, that this is their defiance. No, I decided I live with tomorrow, not with today. Our spirit, which we proudly hold high within the walls of the ghetto, will be the finest gift to the future which now arises. Now, Yitzhak did not live to see that future, but we, reading these words, can absorb that spirit and are inspirited by it to imagine a future for us. Long live youth, he writes, the progress of our people. From YIVO, where Sutzkever works, he was able to smuggle in a lot of material for the Yehoash exhibition. When you go into the exhibition, you see the youthful energy which gave a full vent to everything here. Everything was selected in a beautiful and youthful way, as I feel about this exhibition. Everything is so cultural and so full of warmth. People came in here and forgot that they are in the ghetto. We have here in the exhibition many valuable documents that are now our treasures, and these are precisely the treasures that can be found here today in the National Library and the Central State Archives and the Wroblewski Library and at the YIVO Institute in New York City. They are the treasures of our people. Manuscripts sent from Peretz to Yehoash. Yehoash is... Somehow the printer didn't finish the rest. In any case, what Yitzhak continues to say is that these are the manuscripts that give him a feeling for the future. Why is that important? Because we think of these archives, we think of these books as just being about the past, but they are not about the past. They are as much about our ability to imagine a future as they are for us to understand a past. And without that ability to imagine the future, you will not have a future. And that is the value of the YIVO Institute, of this exhibition, and this whole year of celebration. So I want to talk a little bit, if I have some more time, do I? I want to talk a little bit about precisely that past and the kinds of things that those of you who continue to explore it will find in it, and how that past really can, in spirit and help us imagine the future. So this is the YIVO building, and I apologize for it saying in the caption Vilno, Poland, but I can't change history that easily. Not yet. Maybe with AI we can do that, you know. It was Vilno, Poland, Vilna, to the Lithuanians, Vilnius, even in 1935, but it was in Poland. That is the beautiful building that stood on a street, and though there is a commemorative plaque, the YIVO building actually was not there. It was in the middle of the street. But this is the building after the war. After the bombardment, you'll see some photographs of this at the end of the exhibit later this afternoon. And in the corner, you see Sutzkever, who came back to Vilna in July 1944, approximately 10 days after the Nazis had been thrown out by the Soviets. And he came back to find those manuscripts that he and others had so carefully hidden. But he is here looking in the rubble, because in that rubble are also manuscripts and books that were destroyed in the Soviet bombardment. Here, however, you see Sutzkever with his back to the camera, and Shmerke Kaczerginski, whom I spoke of earlier, sorting books for the Nazis to send back to Frankfurt, for the Institute to study the Jews. It was Alfred Rosenberg's institute. Alfred Rosenberg, the architect of Nazi race ideology. It was his institute, and he wanted all of these treasures from the YIVO archive for anti-Semitic propaganda after the war, to prove why the Jews had to be exterminated. Here is a photograph of those materials at the train depot, being prepared for being sent. Those materials were never, fortunately, incorporated into the Frankfurt Institute, because by the time the Institute became operational, the Nazis had lost the Battle of Stalingrad, as Rudershevsky notes in his diary, and they had other things to worry about than the looting of Jewish books. And so they stayed in a warehouse depot in Offenbach, Germany, where the U.S. Army found these materials after the war, and after much of a legal process and scholarly process, these materials were sent, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, to the YIVO Institute in New York City, where Max Weinreich had taken up residence and began to reconstruct the YIVO Institute. And that was all that we knew about the survival of our manuscripts. Avram Sutzkever and others who did survive came back to Vilna after the war, and they went house to house searching for the manuscripts that they had hidden in the ghetto. And you can see here their pushcart and how they were accomplishing this. And after the war, they had the idea of building a new museum of Jewish life in Vilnius, because they were intent on restoring Jewish cultural life in this city. But then a second disaster happened. Lithuania was overwhelmed by the Soviet Union, by Joseph Stalin, and in 1948, Stalin initiated the anti-Jewish, anti-cosmopolitan campaign, and it was Soviet policy, Stalin's policy, that all material culture that in any way supported the national ideas of different peoples had to be destroyed. And so all of those books and documents and as you can see, sculptures and even paintings and many other things that had been saved at the risk of their lives were now slated for destruction. However, at this particular moment, there was a man, a Lithuanian man, named Antanas Ulpis, who was a librarian. He was the head of the Lithuanian Book Chamber, which was in the former Church of St. George in downtown Vilnius. And though he had been a Soviet in the Soviet army, he decided that he would oppose Joseph Stalin's decision to destroy these materials. And he did. And with a small group of colleagues, he took these materials that were slated for the pulping mill, and he brought them to the Church of St. George, and he hid them under tarps in various localities. He gave some materials to the Wróblewski Library. And as just a very short anecdote, when I went to the Wróblewski Library to see these materials, I walk into the director's office, and she had set up on a table, a long table, boxes and boxes and boxes of materials. I said, what is all of this? Because I didn't know. It was Anna Avidan. I think, Anna, you're here? Anna? Somewhere? Anna? Anna is the one who brought me to the Wróblewski Library. And I said, what are all of these things? She said, look inside. And I start looking. I see the stamp of YIVO on these documents. And I turn to her and I say, you've been keeping these documents since 1948 here? She said, yes. I said, well, what were you waiting for? She said, we were waiting for you. She literally said that. We were waiting for you. And so there's a kind of Bashir quality to all of this that almost defies the imagination, you know? But nevertheless, his son, one more anecdote, told me that one day he accompanied his father, Antanas, into the church. And there was a big organ. And so as a little boy, every child does this, going in and seeing an organ. They immediately sit down and start pounding the keys and pulling the stops and pressing the pedals, and no sound whatsoever came out. And Danius looks around and his father is laughing at him. And his father says, go look in the bellows of the organ. And he does. And the bellows were stuffed with Jewish manuscripts in Yiddish. And it's extraordinary, actually, to think of the bellows of an organ in a church filled with Jewish words. I mean, think about that as a metaphor for a moment, and chills start running down your spine. Anyway, this was the condition that many of those documents were in when we started working on them. And Lara Lempert could not be here, but she was the supervisor of this project. She is now chief curator of the Judaica Center at the National Library, and we will be going there, and she will give a talk. But you can see pages stuck together, torn, broken, fragmented. That was the condition of that heritage. Torn, broken, fragmented, stuck together, illegible, and essentially lost. And that's partly why it took 7 years. Lara and her team lovingly, caringly, beautifully separated these, conserved them, and then digitized them. And they are part of that collection that are now being viewed by 1.5 million people around the world. This, however, was one of the documents that was discovered in 2017, the Diary of Beba Epstein, which is now in the National Library here. And her photograph captivated me when I saw this. And I asked the library to send it to New York so I could have a press conference. And we did. And the reporter from the New York Times was as captivated by that photograph as I. And he photographed it and put it on the front page of the culture section of the New York Times the next day. And then later that afternoon, I received a telephone call. Hello? Are you Mr. Brent? Yes. Well, I'm the son of Beba Epstein, because no one knew that she had survived. Nobody did. But she did miraculously survive, and eventually found her way to America, had a family, got married, had a family, and lived to see grandchildren. She died in 2012. And her story is the basis of, little Beba Epstein's story is the basis of the online museum that YIVO has created, which I'll talk about in a little while. What follows here are some of the materials that were saved, and some of the materials in our archive that I think are of some interest. This, for instance, is a poster. We have thousands of these posters, but this one in particular I love, The Modern Family Life on Trial, which I think it's still on trial. As far as I can tell from all of my friends, there is endless warfare going on between generations in American Jewish families, and probably not just American Jewish families. But then Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, translated into Yiddish in 1924, The Tale of the Dead Princess by Pushkin, translated into Yiddish. But this in particular, an algebra book published in Vilna in 1829 in Yiddish. What does that tell you about the Jewish world? Every single one of these things, to me, coming from a relatively educated Jewish family in Chicago, Illinois, with parents who spoke and read Yiddish and were fairly educated themselves. My father owned a bookstore for over 60 years. Every one of these documents is a challenge, a provocation to think about, what was Jewish life really? What was it really? Not just what you think it might have been from watching Fiddler on the Roof, or going to an exhibition of Chagall, or reading Abraham Joshua Heschel or Irving Howe. What was it really? And this, the Iliad and the Odyssey in Yiddish, fantastic. Who were these people? They were just like us. That's who they were. They were just like us. And though they lived 100 years ago, they could be our next-door neighbors. And they are our next-door neighbors in our deepest, deepest historical memory. This also, I thought, was wonderful. A Jewish nurse in the Tsarist army, circa 1916. But then these pictures of children performing a dance, children doing calisthenics, children undergoing medical examination, and this one in particular I love, which is the hygienic checklist of Sora Karchevitz, circa 1927, in which she has to write down how many times she brushes her teeth, how she combs her hair, when does she take a bath, does she change her underwear, and all of these things. What does it tell you? It tells you that we were taking care of our people, that we were caring for our children, that we knew things. And this is an astronomical diagram from 1845 from Vilna, Poland, written in Yiddish. So we weren't just caring for the daily things of life, we were imagining the heavens, not as they're presented in Bereshit Bara, but as we can study them with our eyes and ears and our mind. I'll skip this police report about Jewish revolutionaries. Enough about that. But here are kids at a Orthodox kids at a summer camp, and here is Yitzhak. Rudershevsky, what a face. What an extraordinary pair of eyes. This is the diary that we have in New York City. But then we have these other documents, these documents of the tragedy, about gassing in the Chelmno death camp, about children in the Lodz ghetto. These are greetings that the children sent to Rumkowski, the leader of the ghetto, in 1941, September 1941, and the care and the beauty of these pages is extraordinary, that they did this in ghetto conditions. But this is what is most extraordinary about that book. Every child signed his or her name. And for the most part, that's all that exists of those children. We have people coming to the YIVO Institute in New York from all over the world searching for a relative's name or a friend's name, and they find them. Marian Turski, who is a very distinguished Polish official and a leader of the Jewish community, had come to visit, and he was about 90 years old at the time. And we were just sitting around, and I was asking him where he was from, and he said he was from Lodz. I asked if he had been in the Lodz ghetto. He said, yes, he's 90 years old. I said, well, do you remember signing your name in a book? He said, yeah, I do. And we spent 2.5 hours, and we found his name. And he nearly fainted when he found it here. He was among 14,400 other children, of whom approximately 200 survived. These are children from Salonika. This is an Auschwitz logbook, and you see how it looks really like sort of a hotel register. And it's supposed to look like a hotel register because part of this is record keeping. But I believe that the main function of this record keeping was to normalize the atrocity and to make it seem just ordinary. They're checking in and they're checking out. And when they check out, we draw a line through their name. And then we have, of course, these kinds of photographs. But we have a great deal about the partisans, the fighters. And this is one from the Vilna ghetto. Now, what does it have to do with YIVO coming back to Vilna? Because that's really what I was supposed to be talking about. What does it mean to come back to Vilna, to a home that is our home, that we feel is our home, but there is nowhere to come back to? It's a bit of a puzzle. How do you do that? How do you return to a place that is no longer the place? I mean, if I wanted to go back to where I was born in Chicago, Illinois, I could do that. I could go to 1224 Farwell Avenue. To this day, I remember the street address. I could go there. My parents don't live there anymore. I don't live there anymore, but the house is there. I could see it, the neighborhood. But here, how do you go back? How do you go back after all of that? What does it take? Well, I have no explanation for that. I think only time can help us understand how to do that. For the first time in the 85 years that we have been essentially, as we feel at YIVO, in exile. This is the odd thing. We were in Vilna for 15 years, and we've been in the United States for 85 years. and we feel that this is our home, and New York is only sort of our home. It's our home in exile. Now, I don't particularly feel that way because I was born in the United States, but somehow when you get into the YIVO Institute, that spirit permeates you. But for the first time, what we have done is to create what we call a learning and media center. And the walls are decorated with photographs of our past and images from our exhibitions. We have a place where we can look at documents. We have a place where you can listen to music and watch the videos that we have. We have 100 videos of pre-war life in Eastern Europe, many pertaining to Lithuania and to Vilnius in particular, where you see actual people going about their daily lives. And now we have a place where we can show these things. We have a small classroom that can seat 30 students, and students from Columbia University and Yale and New York University and Fairfield come, and high schools from New York and Connecticut and Pennsylvania. They've all come to have lessons that are curated specifically for the purposes of teaching them about this life. And in short, we've created an area not that much bigger than this space, where you walk into it and all of a sudden you feel that you are back where you belong. And now I'm trying to find a place for that home here in Vilnius, as a place where these artifacts, properly curated, properly presented, can be made available to students. And I should say that the people who come are Jewish and not Jewish. We had a group from a local school, and 2 Indian kids were there, and they so fell in love with Yiddish theater that they went back and made an exhibition in the Riverdale school and invited us to come and see it, and it was quite wonderful. And we are trying to find a home for that. And right now, to my dear colleagues from Lithuania, I believe that's the best we can do. But I would say one thing, that YIVO has actually never left. And so I want to leave with that thought, that YIVO in some way has never left. And what we're doing now is just revealing what it is. So thank you very much.